everyone, this is Yosef of 52 Frames with a special edition of Coffee and Critique for Week 11, Rule of Thirds for our 52 Frames project, where photographers from around the world, now in over 60 countries, submit a weekly photo according to a different challenge. And this week was Rule of Thirds, which is a very popular photography rule. And this is a special edition of Coffee and Critique where I want to go over a specific concept, not directly related to Rule of Thirds, a photographic concept called depth of field. I'm going to get to that in a moment. But first, I want to thank our amazing 52 Frames patrons. Now 58 of you who have so far contributed almost $500 per month, which is halfway to our goal where I can hire developers to create our very own 52 Frames website. So in no particular order, I want to thank from the bottom of my heart all of you patrons who have contributed since our last screencast. Thank you to Jennifer, Sandy, Ruli, Devin, Jennifer, Les, Barry, Adva, Barbara, Svenja, Anne, Eric, Amy, Griselda, Shayanika, Stephanie, Gary, Nick, Brian, Jamie, Laura, Shimmy, Tracy, Kathy, Thomas, Jonathan, Beth, and Candace. You guys, thank you so much for your participation and your belief in the project. And this really gives me the strength to keep going and to do some really exciting things for the near future. Okay, so let's get into it. Depth of field is basically the space in your frame, the plane of focus that your camera and your lens is able to focus on. In this case, this cute little ladybug here. And everything behind that subject, as well as in front of that subject, is then going to be blurred. And the depth of this field is contingent on three things, meaning how wide this space is that's in focus depends on three things. The first thing that most people are aware of is the aperture, right? So the lower the number, the wider the aperture, the more of that beautiful bokeh blurry goodness you're gonna get in the background. The second thing is your focal length, how zoomed in your lens is. So the more zoomed in your lens, the greater the number of your focal length, the more blur you're going to get behind your subject, meaning the shallower your depth of field is going to be. And the third thing is the distance from your subject to the lens. And this is something that most people, I think, don't realize, that it's really one of three integral factors of getting this depth of field. So if you are shooting very close to your subject, you're more likely to have that background blurred. If you're shooting a subject that's far away, don't expect to get beautiful bokeh behind it because the distance from your camera to the subject could be too far. So what I want to do for this week is something very unique that I'm really excited about, and that is pulling out some photos from this past week's album of Rule of Thirds based on focal length, aperture value, and what lens you're using. So what's very cool is that I'm able to apply a filter in this program that I'm using, which is Adobe Bridge. And this is something you can do in Lightroom as well. And it really comes in handy when you have a batch of photos like this from multiple cameras and lenses. So if we see here on the left side, we have our filter categories. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to our focal length. Now, obviously, I'm only going to show you pictures that have EXIF data, because if your EXIF data was wiped for whatever reason in the process, then this won't come up in these categories. So let's go ahead and click on some of these really extreme ends of long focal lengths. So we have 300 to 600, which are extremely long. And we immediately will be able to see this pattern of having a blurred background. This was a 600 millimeter focal length, which is a very niche wildlife photography lens that's probably larger than my arm. And what's very interesting about the EXIF data here that we can see is that this was shot with an aperture of 7.1, which is relatively narrow, which is not very wide. And yet, because it was such a long focal length, we can see the difference even between the birds. This bird is already out of focus, beyond the plane of focus, whereas this bird is in that tack sharp area of the shallow depth of field for that lens. So right off the bat, you can see some of these beautiful examples of getting that blurred depth of field by using a long focal length. Now, there still has to be certain things in play. So for example, this image here has no background, so we're not really able to see much blur. And this image, it does seem a bit distorted, but the background isn't much further away than the subject itself. So the other two things still do need to come to play. One, which is obvious, and maybe I didn't include in the list, which is you need to have a background, right? You need to have that depth to show that something closer to the camera is more in focus than what's further away. So if you're shooting a flat surface, something like this, and you're not really going to show as much the blurred background, though we can't see it here. Okay, so let's pull up my favorite example. The best way to achieve a wide aperture, meaning a low number, is getting in my opinion, the most important, easiest, simplest, no-brainer upgrade. Definitely the first upgrade you should get after getting your DSLR, after getting the kit lens, is the 50mm 1.8, otherwise known as the NIFTY 50. I know this for Canon. I believe Nikon sells a very similar lens. Canon sells this lens for just over $100, which is just a no-brainer. Literally, this piece of glass, let me clear this filter here. We'll click on this. 51.8, this is the Nikon, and then we can go down to Canon. 51.8, different models of the same lens. And for the price to glass ratio, which is a formula that I just made up now, this is the best investment you could possibly make. Bang for your buck, the 50mm 1.8 at $100 will phenomenally improve your photography. I'm not going to get into it now, but basically, like the prime lens, the glass is fused together in that perfect money spot. The ability to get that wide aperture to blur out your backgrounds, it just takes you up the next level. I'll put down links at the bottom so you can check out the lenses that I'm talking about, because I always say this, but this is definitely the first upgrade that you should make when you're ready for it, is the 51.8. Arguably better than like the 1.4 and the 1.2, which are way more money. Anyways, let's show some examples. So I don't know that if these were shot at 1.8, but generally I think people will shoot this at 1.8 using this lens, because that's what's really nice about the lens. We can see here this is 1.8. If I click on this, this has a lot of bokeh. You see here that's at 1.8. This is at 2.0. The truth is, at 1.8, in general, when you're maxing out a lens, you're going to degrade the quality slightly. The real sweet spot of lenses comes a few stops away from the extreme end. So if your lens can max out at 1.8, going to 2.0, 2.8 will get you a bit of a sharper image. Same at the other end of f22, if that's the maxed out narrow edge of the aperture. Bringing that into f18, f10, things like that, that will get you a more clearer photo, but that's really nitpicky. I mean, if you have to go 1.8, do it. It's a lot of fun. And you're seeing here some really nice, well, this is at 6.3. This you're obviously not going to get a depth of field because you're looking at a two-dimensional flat image there. This is a beautiful example right here. 1.8, Beautiful, beautiful conditions here. Beautiful depth of field. I mean, this is how to use it. Rachel, beautiful image. The only thing I would just correct that little, horizon line. Always important. Okay. Okay. What's cool about the 50 millimeter 1.8 as well is that while 50 millimeters isn't an extremely long focal length, it is long enough to get you that shallow depth of field that we're looking for, meaning much more than a wider focal length, like something like 16 millimeters, something like that. The 50 is just a great walk around lens for this purpose. Quick critique on this guy, it just looks like your color balance is a bit yellow, and the color balance can be very easily manipulated with this slider, which is found in Lightroom as well. And for this image, I would just cool it down. I'd bring it down to the blues, and then, or I could even choose a white point here and have the program figure out the white balance automatically, and then maybe I would just lower the saturation on the blues because that's a bit much. This to me is a bit more of a natural feel than here. It looks like you do have a yellow tint, but I digress. Off-color tangentialisms aside, we can see here some really nice examples, and this one is a less clear example of depth of field. It doesn't really pop out at you right away, but you can see like it really does bring the image home. We have the nose is quite blurred, the hairs over here are blurred, the background is nice and tucked away in the shadows, blurred, and it really creates this beautiful, nice focus on this dog's eyes. Again, this is a good example of it doesn't matter that you were shooting a 1.8, there's no depth to this image, and your subject is too far away to even get depth. If you shot a close-up on the subject's face here, then you would get some depth of field because your subject's closer to the lens. At this point, even though your aperture is super wide, those other two things, long focal length and the distance from your subject to the lens, is not coming into play, which is why you're not getting any blurred action. And of course, the, what we'll call rule 3B is you don't have depth, right? The background, your subject is right in front of the background. So maybe if this wall was 50 yards away, you'd be able to see some depth of field for that as well. Okay, the next thing I want to pull out is, for me right now, my most favorite lens in the world. I bought this over the summer, and I am just absolutely in love with this lens. And I think it is really the fusion of all the three things that I talked about. And this lens is the Canon 100mm 2.8 macro IS Mark 2.5 beta gamma. Okay, I'm joking for all those last parts. It is the 100mm 2.8 macro. And these are two different lenses. One has the image stabilization, which is the one that I have. And I mean, I had just clicked on these just because I was interested in seeing, oh, who's shooting with this beautiful lens. And I mean, instantly you can see these great examples of really what this lens can do, which is beautiful, creamy backgrounds. And that's because you're ticking all three boxes here, right? You're getting the 100mm, which is a relatively already zoomed in focal length. It's a pretty high number on the focal length chart, if you will. And you're getting 2.8, which at that focal length, okay, is a very wide aperture, right? Because you have to understand, aperture is just one aspect of it. So 2.8 coupled with 100mm is quite wide. But that third holy grail rule of distance to your subject, that's where this lens really comes into play, because it's a macro, which means you can get super close to your subject and it'll still focus. So once you get into macro territory, like in here, The depth of field is so shallow, you're talking about millimeters in the macro world. And sure enough, you can see here, the aperture here is 7.1, which is pretty narrow to get such a shallow depth of field. Because if this person, your name isn't your name, I wish I knew who you were, entry 136, if this person shot it at 2.8, we may not even see the whole bug, because the closer you get, the shallower that depth of field gets. But this lens, as you can see, really just combines the beautiful creaminess of a wide aperture lens with the gorgeous macro focal length of the best macro lenses that are out there. It's just beautiful. Beautiful results here. Really nice photos, you guys. But I just think it's so cool that you can really see the different styles of photographs simply by filtering out what gear was used. Also, this is another great example. You're seeing 5.6, again, not utilizing the full wide aperture because this was probably really close. And so you're getting just that tip of the flower here because the depth of field is so shallow. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is just pull out all the photos that have a wide aperture. Here I chose everything from 1.4 to 2.8, which is all pretty wide, and a focal length of anything more than 50. So that's really your sweet spot, where generally if you're shooting 50 and above with a relatively wide aperture, most of these photos that we're going to see will be a good example of showing this depth of field, showing this blurred background, shallow depth of field. And these are things to keep in mind, because this really is the difference between shooting with a point and shoot, shooting with a phone, and shooting with a DSLR. This is really where the DSLR gear, right out of the box, starts to shine, starts to take your photography up a notch, because you're getting this depth that you can't as easily get with your standard phone, the lenses on your phones, on your point and shoots, and also some of your kit lenses is harder to achieve. Another, just real quick, I'll end off with this. Another great lens that I have in my kit, which I would highly recommend if you're looking to upgrade to a zoom lens. Let's just uncheck the filter here and we'll go down to Canon. Again, I shoot with Canon gear, so I just understand Canon gear better, but you can definitely find this in equivalent for Nikon, and this lens for Nikon is also beautiful. So 70 to 200, the Canon 70 to 200. Now, this lens, for example, the 2.8 IS2 is quite expensive. It's between $2,000 and $3,000. That's not the one that I have. I have this one, 70 to 200 f4. I actually don't have the IS. This is also a beautiful, creamy lens that, even though it's f4, again, because now you have a really long focal length of up to 200 millimeters. So as soon as you zoom into your subject, it's not macro, so your subject can't be too close, but you will be getting, even at f4, this beautiful creamy background. And you can see here, just by these three people that use this lens, you can see the beautiful blurred background starting to lose it. So I recommend, if you're looking to upgrade to this lens for cheaply, if you get the non-IS version. This is a very high quality L series Canon lens, 70-200 f4. You could get that for, I think it goes for $600 now, which is incredible for the glass that it is. I bought mine for $800. If you wanted to get the IS, I think that's upwards of $1,000. And then if you want to start shooting these down to 2.8 like these guys, that's I think between $2,000 and $3,000, at least last time I checked. I'll include some links below so you can check these lenses out if you're interested in seeing them further. They will also be affiliate links to Amazon, so that'll help 52 Frames out as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this different style of screencast where I'm not just critiquing the photos, but kind of analyzing the work that's essentially crowdsourced from the community. It's really cool to be able to look at this data, and looking forward, I would love to have this type of functionality on our website so that anyone can go to any album or even globally to be searching through all of the albums and actually have something like this where you can click on, you want to see all photos shot with 51.8, and it'll show you that. If you want to sort that by most liked, if you want to sort by only people that checked that it was a macro, or only street photography. So this is what gets me excited, that once we can kind of house our photos in our own home on the website, and I could get development going, there's so many cool things that we can really use this data for to help us to improve our photography and to really visualize the nuances of like what all this different gear means. So I hope this clarified some things for you guys. Thanks for tuning in. As always, you can check out our amazing photo project at 52frames.com. And if you'd like to support this wonderful project as little as $1 a week, you can go to patreon.com/52frames. Again, thank you so much to all of our Patreon supporters. I'm really looking forward to what we can do ahead. And that's it. Until next time, happy shooting.